Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. As promised, today we have a real treat. I have with us Godless Granny. She is a friend of mine from the atheist sphere, and she also happens to be an attorney. And I was just real pleased that we could have her on the show and actually talk to her about an attorney's perspective on true crime and things like that. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself, or tell my subscribers a little bit about yourself.
Okay. My name is Godless Granny, and if anyone wants to look me up on YouTube, I do have a channel by that name, Godless Granny. I cover primarily religion, but I also do a little bit of science and a little bit of a lot of things. I'm also a trans parent, so I do a lot of trans rights, and I'm also an ally to the LGBTQ community. As far as my law background, I got my JD in 1988 from Baylor Law School. I passed the bar exam in May of '89. A fun fact, I was 9 months pregnant when I took the bar exam. I delivered 2 weeks after taking the exam. But it also takes 4 months to get the results, which is why I passed in May, even though I took the exam in February.
Is it as grueling as I've heard? The bar?
Yeah, I was as worried about the pregnancy though as I was about the exam, because the exam is 2.5 days. And this was my third pregnancy. And just to give you a clue of the way I think, which is rather different the way a lot of people think, the exam is 2.5 days. And when I walked into the exam on the third day, I said, good, it's only 4 hours today. I could go into labor and finish the exam and still get to the hospital in plenty of time.
Oh, wow. I had a friend of mine that's an attorney as well. When she said that her and her best friend at the time went to take the bar exam together. They rode together. They were chatty and everything as they normally were. They stayed in a hotel. They went through the entire plethora of the exam, and then they were driving home after the final exam and said, dead silence. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them did anything. And then she let her friend out. Her friend got out, closed the door, didn't even say bye, just went in the house. I mean, they were fine like next week, but I guess it was just, it took so much out of them. They were just like.
One thing I thought was interesting though is I felt like being in law school was like being in a time warp, because I went to Baylor, which was on the quarter system, and you could finish law school in 9 quarters, if you took them all in a row. And you had 10 weeks of class, then you had a week of exams, you had 1 day off, and then you started classes again on Monday for the next quarter. And, everything was just bam, 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 bam. And, time just, everything just went so fast. But when you're pregnant, it seems like everything takes forever. And being pregnant while going to law school, it was really kind of weird the way it just kind of warped my sense of time.
I've never heard of a law school being on quarters. I thought most of them were on the semester system, and that, you got a little bit more of a substantial break. That I know. So you were taking like 3 classes, boom, 3 classes, boom, 3 classes, boom. That's a lot. Wow. Wow.
I usually started studying for finals during the second week of class.
Okay. Is it true that in most law schools there's only like 1 exam for the whole course, and that's
yes, that's the difficulty of law school, is there is 1 exam and that is your grade. There are no papers. Well, I shouldn't say. Occasionally there are classes that will ask for papers, but for the most part, yeah, you take 10 weeks of class, you take an exam, and whatever you get in your exam, that's your grade.
Wow. Uh, all right. Well, tell me what kind of law did you specialize in, and or do you specialize in?
Um, I pretty much did insurance law. Now,
Mm,
I had kind of a quirky career, and that's because I was married to a man who was active duty Army.
mhm,
So after I passed the bar exam, the Army moved us from Killeen, Texas at Fort Hood to our, and so I practiced for a year on my own. I didn't even bother trying to work for a firm because I said no firm in their right mind is going to hire me knowing I'm going to only stay here for 1 year. And I
right.
don't want to work for a firm where the people aren't in their right minds. So I did private practice just on my own general law. Then my husband's next assignment was in Ohio. And it was in Lima, Ohio, which if you've ever been to Lima, Ohio, it's a nothing town. There's nothing there. So we actually ended up living in Fort Wayne, which
Mhm.
was 60 miles away, but it's a much nicer town to live in. And I got myself a job in Indiana in Fort Wayne working for an insurance company, which actually worked out well because the best grade I got in law school, they had a high A. Whoever got the best grade on an exam, the one high A that I got was in insurance law. So I
Nice.
spent the next 10 years working for insurance companies. So insurance law is really my specialty.
Very cool.
And I did a lot of workers' compensation law for that insurance company.
Excellent. Would did you do any work at all? I mean, not in criminal law at all. Did you have to do any kind of hours or anything like that in that realm?
No, I did not do any criminal law. Of course, I took a course in criminal law. You have to do that. Baylor is known as the trade school of law schools because most law schools focus more on the theory,
Mhm.
whereas Baylor tends to focus a little bit more on practice. They have a 5-credit evidence course, which I love when someone starts arguing with me about hearsay evidence, because I said, I could give you a 20-hour lecture on hearsay evidence. Would you like me to start?
Well, it's strange. I've noticed like a lot of cases that I've studied, like sometimes the judge, when talking about hearsay specifically, will
Mhm.
allow the words of another person in under certain circumstances. And
That's
then in other
because there's a
cases, they
list of
won't.
about 50 exceptions to the hearsay rule.
Really?
Yeah, and the one that most people get wrong is admission of a party opponent, which actually is not an exception to a hearsay rule, to the hearsay rule. It is by definition not hearsay, because hearsay is an in-court statement about an out-of-court statement given by a person to prove the truth of the matter asserted. But if you
Mhm.
are a party to the lawsuit, then it isn't an out-of-court statement. It's by someone who's right there. So it by definition is not hearsay.
Wow. I know the most recent example was in the Rittenhouse case, where Kyle Rittenhouse case, where not in the case, but the judge that presided over the case. I went back, looked at his record because of all the controversy with him, and he's only had, I think, one decision reversed, and it was because he allowed a prosecutor in a murder case where a husband was accused of killing his wife. He allowed in a an answering machine recording of the
Mhm.
wife saying, "If I die, my husband killed me," and he allowed that in, and of course that got reversed and thrown out in appeal. So that's the, like I said, that's the most recent case that I remember. So that would definitely be hearsay in your opinion, allowing in an answering machine recording.
There are a couple of exceptions that could apply to. One
Hmm.
is a dying declaration.
Hmm.
Um, a dying declaration is generally allowed as an exception to the hearsay rule. And if she died shortly after that, her having believed that she was dying, that could very well be one of the exceptions.
Well, maybe he did get it right, and the appellate court got it wrong. I mean, I didn't get into too far into the details of the case, but
That one's a close call. I could see a judge going either way on that one. But anyway, getting back to Baylor,
sorry.
after that's okay. I sidetracked us. Um, After you take the evidence course, then there's a 10-credit practice court course, which is taken over the course of 2 quarters. and you practice trying cases in practice court. And that's why Baylor is called the trade school of law schools.
Well, I think that's better. I mean, having
Mhm.
lawyers come out that know all this theory and can write a brief, okay, great. But I think having somebody that has some experience in litigation would probably be better. I think maybe more law schools should do that,
Mhm.
coming from a
But a lot
non-lawyer.
of attorneys have no intention of ever going into litigation. So,
Yeah,
you know, it's got its ups and its downs.
yeah, absolutely. Another a YouTuber that I collaborate with sometimes, True Crime Sushi. She's a paralegal. She works with
Okay.
a defense. They specialize in criminal defense, and we were
Mhm.
discussing a case, and she kind of told me that, every time I hear about somebody being accused of something, I can already come up with like 20 different ways I could get them off by writing. She said a lot of it happens, behind the scenes. She said most criminal trials are plea bargained out.
Yes.
They never see a
Mhm.
courtroom.
The same is true of tort claims,
Uh,
not even crimes, but civil cases.
exactly. Exactly. Well, all right. Well, I guess this is something I've discussed on my channel quite a bit. The ethics around true crime. Not about crime itself, but just about this whole genre of true crime as entertainment might be a better way. And as much as I love it, and it's like a passion of mine, I do know that in many, many cases, it damages someone's ability to get a fair trial.
Yes,
Um,
it does.
from an attorney's perspective, what are your thoughts on that? And do you think there's a way to correct that without outlawing true crime as entertainment? What would be your take on that?
I really don't think there is anything you can do about it because I don't see true crime as being any more, and actually I see it of less as of an intrusion as the news media.
Mhm.
I think the news media does more damage to people's rights than does, the true crime takes. Mostly because people put more stock in the truth of the news media. And a
Mhm.
lot of times the news media gets it right, but a lot of times the news media will report on things that cannot be shown at trial, but the jurors have already seen it. And so, yeah, it does have an effect.
Absolutely. I think that's why I feel better ethically covering crimes that have already had a resolution. So I'm not really
Yes.
damaging people.
Hmm. Hmm.
I have been covering ongoing trials just because they're ongoing, but in that regard, I'm more of a news commentator, not really a true crime investigator, in my opinion.
I also don't see, if the trial has already started, the chances of you having any effect on it are pretty small. Because the jury is going to be they're not going to see a lot of influence that's coming out from outside their local area. So unless you're with a national news, media, or with if you're putting out your show in the same city where the trial is going on, it's really unlikely that anything that someone that's involved in true crime is really going to have any effect or impact on the proceedings.
Well, that makes me feel a little bit better because I do struggle with that. I don't want to give it up, but I'm like, I don't want to hurt anybody's chances of a trial either. But that makes a lot of sense that we're kind of covering it after the fact. We're not
Hmm.
really in there.
Hmm.
Um, well,
And
are you, no, go
the
ahead.
jury is admonished not to look at anything about the trial that they are currently working on. And yeah, there can be jury misconduct, and a juror might look at something that they're not supposed to. But for the most part, the jurors listen to the judge's
Yeah.
instructions. So if the trial's already started, it's extremely unlikely that you'd have any impact.
Do you think, like, for example, I don't think the jury in the Ahmaud Arbery case was sequestered. I know the Rittenhouse jury was not sequestered. In very, very high profile cases like that, do you think it's a mistake to not to sequester? I mean, is there really any way with all the coverage going on that you could guarantee they're not going to be influenced by something?
Exactly. It used to be that sequestering a jury had a lot of impact because most of the media coverage was going to be print media.
Mhm.
But now in this digital age, everything is coming over your computer and through your TV. And even if you sequester the jury, they're still going to have access to all of that.
Yeah. Unless they take their phones and take the hotel,
Take the TVs out
TV
of
out of the hotel room,
right,
and all that.
And they might for something that is, really huge, like a mafia boss, where you're really concerned about, any kind of information, tainting the jury. But that's going to be so extremely rare.
Yeah. Well, even just outside the courthouse and everything that happened, at the two trials last week, you had media outlets following jurors' buses and protesters outside the courthouse and influencers threatening to dox jurors. You're in this new day and age, you can't really protect jurors from that. They just have to be have enough wherewithal not to give into that, and just at least protect their identities as much as you can.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I've sat on 2 juries in my time, but nothing that high profile. I don't think I would want to. One was a very large auto accident where one party was suing the other, and the other was fortunately a child abuse case. But yeah. But speaking of current trials, we know we have the Maxwell case going on in connection with Epstein. We also have the Joshua Duggar case going on. Both of those are federal cases, so they're not streaming, unfortunately. And of course, we have the Jussie Smollett case going on for the allegedly false hate crime from 2019. Have you been following any of those?
I've been following the Maxwell case. I'm certainly aware of the Duggar case. Is it Duggar or Drugger? I'm not sure.
Duggar.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm aware of his case, but I have not been reading a whole lot about it. And Jussie Smollett, I followed his case fairly closely when it first came out, but I haven't read much about what's going on currently. That one was kind of interesting because when it first happened, I was watching his his initial testimony before it came out that he had organized all of this, and I said, this just looks off to me. Something about this just doesn't look right. But I was really afraid to say anything because I thought, well, maybe that's my own racial prejudice. Maybe I'm just misreading him because as a different race, I'm not seeing him correctly. So I didn't say anything.
I was the same way. I was like, doesn't seem right. I mean, I don't see, living in the gay area of Chicago where he lived, I don't think there's that many open Trump supporters running around, doing things, and especially in a very blue city like Chicago. So it just didn't seem right to me. But and of course, everything started to come out. And then when they initially dropped the charges and just kind of swept it under the rug, and then of course, I think Illinois got involved, outside of Chicago, and then forced them to basically recharge him. I find that's a pattern here lately, where I think sometimes cases maybe are charged or overcharged, maybe for political reasons, or to make an example. Like, for example, the Ahmaud Arbery case. And I did a story on that when that first happened, and I pegged them. I said, they killed this guy. I thought he was an innocent jogger, but after watching the case, I realized, he was probably there up to no good. Let's be honest, casing for a robbery, he was probably there for that reason. But if that's the case, they still had no right to do what they did. They should have recorded him and called the police is the proper way to act. You don't chase somebody down and shoot them. So it was murder, in my opinion. But I never quite understood why, and maybe you can explain to me as an attorney, why they charged each of them with like 5 different counts of murder on one person. To me, that sounded like a little bit of overkill, and that's just from a layman looking in. But could you maybe help? Do you know?
I can help you with a little bit of it, but even I'm not sure exactly what the charges were. Now, a lot of times you do charge people with multiple, not counts, but you charge someone with a crime and all of the lesser included crimes. So like
Right.
if you charge someone with first degree murder, you also charge them with second degree murder in case the jury doesn't find that there was malice aforethought. And in that case, the jury can only find them guilty of one of the two, not of both.
Right.
Now, one of the things with the Ahmaud Arbery case was there was also a hate crime, and that is a completely separate
Yeah.
crime.
Yeah.
So the hate crime was one thing, the murder was another, and
And
I'm
felony
not
murder.
felony murder.
But they charged him with like 3 other felonies. So there was a murder attached to each felony is the way it was kind
Okay,
of
that makes sense
explained.
then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, because there was a charge of false imprisonment, which is a
Yep.
felony.
Yeah.
And then a felony murder charge attaches to the false imprisonment. Yeah.
And
Okay,
then
I can see how that worked then.
there was aggravated assault, and then there
Mhm.
was a violation of his civil rights, and that was
Mhm.
the third one. So
Okay.
yeah, I definitely think justice was served in that. Just to
Mhm.
put it out there, I definitely do. But I was just
One
confused.
thing I would put out though is I was not even convinced that he was even up to no good. I know that in my neighborhood, when I first moved in, there was a lot of construction going on. And we stopped when we would go out walking in the evening, we would stop in a lot of the homes that were under construction just to look around and see what the different blueprints were and, see some of the different styles of how they were building the houses. And so, people walking through houses under construction is not at all unusual.
Oh, no, and I said that in my original video about it. But then after
Okay.
seeing some of the additional surveillance video that was around, it just was apparent maybe he was up to no good.
Okay.
And it's just because I watched the trial. And
Okay.
so I saw additional evidence. But my first gate was like, this is open and shut,
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
the fact that that little tiny police department was just kind of sweeping it under the rug and weren't going to charge them. I'm like,
Mhm.
no, that's no.
The one thing that I was a little bit confused on with that case, though, was the guy that videotaped him.
Yeah.
I can see where, yeah, it's probably likely that he was in on the whole thing, the fact that, he happened to be there. But on the other hand, maybe not, maybe he saw what was going on and stepped in to get it all on tape. I don't know. I just don't know
He's the
anything
one.
about what he was doing.
Of the 3, he's the one. I think his name was I can't think of his last name, but the one that was just filming it.
Mhm.
He's the one that released the video to the press. I mean, I
Right.
think he was just trying to show what was going on, and then they got him too. I'm like, yeah, if he was taping it for his own sick enjoyment, that's one thing, but I didn't get that vibe from him. I think that he saw what was happening and just followed them and kept the camera on them. And it does kind of make you step back and go, well, if I see something occurring, should I video it or not? Are they going to tie me up in it?
Judging from what happened, I'm guessing that there was some evidence that he was asked to do this and he was notified in advance, which also brings up the level of the crime to more of a hate crime that, that maybe they were casing him. Maybe they were following him even
Yeah.
before he went in there.
Oh, yeah. It came out that the 3 had like this community watch agreement with the owner of the home, who was kind of caught in a lie a couple of
Mhm.
times, saying that he didn't ask him to watch his house, but then later on it came out that he did from from recordings and stuff like that. So I think they were watching his property and casing him probably because of the color of his skin. Let's be
Mhm.
honest. That
Yeah. Yeah.
if you or I had walked in that house and walked out, even if we were running by, I don't run many places, you can tell by looking at me, but even if I was running by, I don't think you or I would have gotten the same, the
I
same
agree.
reaction.
Mhm. Nobody would have said a thing. Yep.
Nope. Nope, definitely. All right. Well, the Maxwell case, probably the most trying. They're keeping I have a good friend that lives in New York, Roberta Glass. She runs the True Crime Report podcast, and she's actually sitting in the gallery listening to the
Oh,
case.
cool.
But yeah, I don't know that. I don't like to put out there that I think somebody did it, but I think she did it. I think
Mhm.
she's guilty. I think she was in. Now, I also have to say maybe she's being set up as some kind of patsy. I'm not saying she's innocent or not guilty. I think she was in on it, but I think maybe she's the sacrificial lamb for all these other people that were involved in it. And I think maybe if they find her guilty, that they think that because there's a lot of influential people that were on those flight manifests.
The one way in which I could see her not being guilty
Right.
is if Epstein had some kind of power over her.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was, I don't even know if they're making that claim.
Her defense is that she was coerced and abused into doing it, an unwilling participant that feared for her life. I mean, time will tell. If it comes out that she is, a victim herself, I will recant everything that I said. But because we can't ask him, I mean, he's gone by whether he killed himself or somebody killed him. We don't, whatever. We can't really get him. But it just makes me wonder: are they ever going to release the investigations on the other people named in those manifests? I mean, we've got Trump, we've got the Clintons, we've got Chris Rock, we've got some members of the British royal family. I mean, there's no
way you're ever going to get anything on the British royal family.
Yeah.
That is going to be, that is a lid that I don't think anyone can pry off.
Yeah, which is sad. Which is sad.
One thing from that case, though, that I really would like to comment on, and that is, the article that came out today in the New York Times talked about what went on the witness stand. I think it said today, although I didn't look at the date on the article. It could be yesterday. But they caught the witness Jane in some inconsistencies,
Really?
which is not at all surprising because this happened so long ago. Well, one of the inconsistencies was she said that Maxwell and Epstein took her to New York to see The Lion King on Broadway in 1993. And they said The Lion King didn't come out on Broadway until 1997.
Right.
But she might be remembering two different trips and just kind of confused the details. Okay, yeah, I went to New York on both of those dates, and I thought we went to Lion King on the first one, but okay, we went to the Lion King on the second one. Or she might be confusing two different trips in that, they took her to New York, and on a different trip to New York, she saw the Lion King, and she just was thinking that they both happened at the same time. They didn't. Human memory is not that good.
No, it's not. And I can understand why the defense would try to use that, because that's what you do for your client. You try to you try to throw up a reasonable doubt. That's what it's all about. But that's, it's not like, I read that they were going to bring in a manufactured memory expert to kind of see if maybe these memories were just implanted in her mind by, other people. I mean, this isn't the the McMartin preschool case where it was just so outlandish. I mean, there's a lot of other evidence that corroborates this, in my opinion. But time will tell. And memory is not, eyewitness evidence is really not that good of evidence.
It actually isn't.
Even if you get them fresh, right after it happened, you're not going to get the full story.
You hear a lot of people say, well, that's just circumstantial evidence, but a lot of times circumstantial evidence is far better than any other evidence that you're going to get.
Exactly. I mean, I found that eyewitness, especially, this is 10 years ago or more, 20 years ago. Don't ask me something that happened 20 years ago, unless it was something just so, don't ask me about what show I saw on this day in 1997. I won't be able to tell you.
Another thing I wanted to comment about is people expect a particular reaction from victims, and different victims react differently.
Yep.
Some people, when they are severely victimized, they seem to have no emotional reaction to it whatsoever. And it's not because they're not traumatized, and it's not because they don't feel it. It's because they are so traumatized that their emotions have completely shut down. And so that's one of the things I'm reading in the paper. And one thing that's really difficult for a witness is the jury is going to, a lot of jurors, especially jurors who have not experienced sexual abuse, expect to see a particular emotional reaction. And that isn't necessarily the emotional reaction the witness is going to have.
No, you can't predict how anyone's going to react to something. Some people may fall apart. Some people may get angry. Some people may just be numb and not really have any emotional reaction at all. You can't predict that. I agree. And I think, I know, I'm very interested to see how the outcome of this case and anything that may follow it. I don't know if there'll be any more prosecutions from, Epstein's fold. I would hope that there would be, but she may be the only one. I mean, in my opinion, I think she may be to satisfy, the overall cry for blood for some of these crimes. She may be the only one that gets anything thrown at her. As far as the Duggar case, well, as you know, there was always already those allegations that he molested. We've already said so much, this is going to be demonetized anyway, so I'm just going to say it, that he abused couple of his sisters and some other underage girls back when he was a teenager. And of course, that got swept under the rug, as it often does in cults, and dealt with internally, and dealt with by a friend that was a highway patrolman that was also a sex abuser, ironically, that later got busted for it himself. But now, in 2019, he was busted with, I think, 200 CP images on his computer that were cleverly hidden. We're not talking about just on his hard drive. He actually had a Linux system where he split the hard drive. And so over here, he had a normal hard drive that actually had a monitoring system on it that would alert his wife if he was looking at something he shouldn't. Supposed to. It was like
interesting.
It was like a chastity buddy or something like that.
Yeah, I'm aware of those. I'm trying to think of the name of it. There's a particular software that's Covenant Eyes.
Covenant Eyes, yeah. And so that was on one hard drive, and then over here they found all these 200 images of CP when the FBI raided his office, and children as young as 18 months. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I can't either. I don't understand how anyone can find that attractive.
Me either.
But then again, I'm not the best person to comment on that because I'm an ace.
Yeah.
I don't feel sexually attracted to anyone. I've actually I have felt a sexual attraction to 4 men in my lifetime. And the feeling scares me so much I usually run from them.
Well, I'm a member of the LGBT. I call myself identify as a lesbian just because I'm in a lesbian relationship, but I've been with men in my life, and was very deeply in love with one man in my life, and attracted to him, but my attractions, like yours, are few and far between. I'll just put it that way. So we definitely have that in common. But yeah, I don't see that at all, why that's even a thing. But of course, now he's being brought up on charges, and according to updates, Jim Bob Duggar, Big Duggar, actually got into it during pretrial with the judge because he was suddenly had selective memory, where the former allegations from 20 years ago came in. He couldn't remember certain things and things like that he had very conveniently talked about at length, just a couple of years ago.
I don't know anything, but it sure wouldn't surprise me if it eventually comes out that the senior has done something as well. Just because that whole mentality, men are king and they can do whatever they want to. And men are supposed to rule their house. And it just gives men such a power.
Yeah.
And that's what rape is really about. It's not about sex. It's about power.
It's not. I mean, look at ancient warfare. I mean, the Romans, the Genghis Khan, they would rape enemy soldiers after they defeated them. They would do it. It had nothing to do with sexual attraction. It was all about dominance. It's all it's about is dominance. And I've done a whole series. I have a whole playlist about the Quiverful movement on my channel. I've done like several different videos. If you haven't seen Steven Anderson tased, there's a video of him being tased at the border, and one of them, you need to go check that out.
I'll have to go see that.
It'll warm your heart. but yeah, that particularly that cult. You have so many people in families. I mean, we're talking 20, 24 people in a family is common. You can't, by human nature, you can't have that many people living together in the sort of conditions that often they live. I mean, the Duggars are an exception. Most of the people that live that lifestyle are on public assistance because you can't, it's very hard for one person to sustain that many people with an income. And I think sexual abuse or any kind of abuse is much more common in those types of cults where you have so many people living together.
How old is Duggar?
The older Duggar or
no, the younger one, the one that's on trial?
He's 30, 34, 35.
Okay.
Yeah. And evidently his sisters still have a show on TLC, Counting On or something like that. They still have a show. They've kind of removed themselves from him, but they're still there. I think a couple of them are going to be testifying in the trial, but basically the judge basically told Jim Bob that he's not the boss, I am, and that was glorious. And then told them that he would be allowing testimony revolving around that time period and of course the defense objected to it. And he said that his reasoning was that the pictures that were found represented the same age group as he was accused of abusing, so it's relevant. And so he will be allowing that testimony in. So
it's pattern evidence.
That's what it's called then? I mean, it made sense, but I didn't know there was an actual term for it.
It's evidence that you have a pattern of this type of conduct. Generally, prior bad acts are not permitted as evidence. So if you commit a bank robbery, you're on trial for that bank robbery, the prosecution cannot show evidence that you have robbed a bank before so that you're likely to do it again. That's called propensity evidence. But if you've robbed 4 banks before, now you can show that as evidence that this is a pattern of behavior with you.
So one's a no-go, but more than one can represent a pattern.
Right.
Very, very interesting. Well, tell us then the difference between beyond a reasonable doubt and preponderance of the evidence, and what kinds of cases those would apply to, and what's the burden of proof.
Okay. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard of evidence for any criminal trial. And it's not beyond a shred of a doubt, but it's the reasonable man standard is a standard of law that's used in just about everything. It's not just for criminal cases, it's used in civil cases as well. And so what would a reasonably prudent man in the same or similar circumstances find doubtful? And if you find something doubtful and that a reasonable person would find doubtful, then you're supposed to find them not guilty. A lot of people say it's kind of 90%. But you can't really put a percentage on it, but that's kind of sort of how people think of it. A preponderance of the evidence just means more likely than not. And that one is kind of a 51%. That, if you've got evidence on one side, you've got evidence on the other side. If there's just a feather more on one side, that side wins. That's a preponderance.
So definitely for the defense standpoint, reasonable doubt is a much better, better play. Play. The reason I ask is during the Rittenhouse trial, I heard a lot of talk of beyond a reasonable doubt and preponderance of the evidence. They would say that, okay, of course, by the jury standard, it's reasonable doubt, that he willfully and premeditated those shootings. But whereas when they referred to the defense, they said, because they're using self-defense as the main defense, they have to show a preponderance of the evidence that it was self-defense.
That's correct, because self-defense is an affirmative defense.
Right.
He's being charged with the crime of murder, and he's bringing up an affirmative defense. And if you bring up an affirmative defense, then you have to prove your own affirmative defense, but you only have to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence.
I see. Very good. Well, tell us then about your most interesting case, or what you found to be the most interesting case.
Oh, goodness. Okay. This is a case that I worked on as an attorney for an insurance company. We had an insured who owned a building in a downtown area. This particular town is a very old town, and it is kind of sort of dead. You know, one of the funniest things about the town is as you drive into town, there's a sign that says an historic Jewish community. And if you go look at the population of the town, it's 90% Hispanic. The Jewish people are all gone. It used to be a Jewish community, but it hasn't been for quite some time. The downtown area is not in real good condition. All of the buildings are attached to each other and separated by a single wall. And a lot of the upstairs of the downtown business district, there's residences in the upstairs. Okay. So we insured a man who owned one of the downtown buildings, and he leased the building to someone for a tax business. And he specified in the lease that this was not to be used as a residence. Well, the guy put up a curtain and invited his girlfriend and her 2 children to come and live with him in the back of his tax office. And in addition to it being a violation of the terms of the lease, it's also a violation of city ordinance, because the buildings are all attached. They've got a serious rat problem. There's rats underneath the buildings, and they can easily move from building to building. And so for that reason, it is illegal to have a residence on the first floor of any of the buildings downtown. Well, one of the children got bit by a rat, and the girlfriend got an attorney who brought a claim against our insured for not protecting them from the rats in the building. And our attorney said, I don't know who this woman is. She didn't have permission to be on the property in the first place. Her presence there is a violation of not only the lease, it's also a violation of city code. So, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, this just wasn't my responsibility to protect your child from the rats. And so I wrote all that out to the attorney, and the attorney went away. A month later, I got another claim for the same child for the same thing from a different attorney. So I just copied the letter I sent to the first attorney.
Changed the name.
And I said, here's the letter I sent to her last attorney. And that was the last we ever heard of that one.
Well, it makes me wonder what she was telling the attorney.
Mm-hmm.
You know, no, I'm sure that no reasonable attorney would have taken on that case had they known all that up front.
Mm-hmm.
But I may be wrong. But maybe he thought they'll just settle. I'm sure that's probably what they were thinking.
It probably was what they were thinking.
Yeah.
The head of the department used to say, I'll give $1,000 or no, I would give $100 to any man on the street who's in exchange for a release, even if I don't know that anyone we insure has ever done anything to him. Now, he wasn't serious, but it just goes to show that, yeah, just about any claim has at least some settlement value.
Yeah.
And then here's a flip side. We insured, I worked for a company that insured primarily churches. So most of our cases were involved.
That's ironic.
Yeah. Well, I was a staunch believer back then. Don't forget, I've only been an atheist for 2 years. I was a believer for 42 years.
We need to talk about that. Just continue.
Okay. So we got in a claim from a woman who slipped on some ice and snow at the church. And this is a very common thing. And an owner of a property is not responsible for a natural accumulation of ice and snow. And most people don't realize that. Most people think, hey, it's a commercial property. You're responsible for anything that happens on it.
Act of God.
Right, exactly. But we always send in someone out to the location to get some pictures of it for us. And when the pictures came back, I saw that there was a downspout that emptied right onto the sidewalk, exactly where this woman said, how much money would you like? Because we created a hazard there by putting that downspout, putting the water directly onto the sidewalk where it was going to freeze. We created a hazard. So I went from, we're not responsible, to, how much money would you like?
It's 100,000 enough.
Well, her injuries were not that serious. I think we settled it for like 12 or 15, but I
could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse. I think she had like a severely sprained ankle or something, but yeah, there was no question that was our responsibility.
Well, speaking of, I have to ask one more question about criminal law, and then I want to talk about your journey into unbelief. Believe it or not, I have a great mixture of subscribers. I have very religious people. I have staunch LDS people. A lot of them because I've been covering an ongoing case that involves some LDS people, and that's the case I'm about to ask you about. But I have a nice mix of believers and non-believers, but we all get along really well over here. I have right-wingers, moderates like myself, left-wingers. We get along really well over here because I don't allow any hatred in my comments.
Okay.
So speak freely. So the Mormon case, the LDS case I'm covering, is the Chad Daybell Lorie Valo case. If you Google it, you'll see lots about it. Basically, it's another cult. It's a fringe LDS cult. It's not mainstream LDS, but basically they were all involved in it. They all thought they were purveyors of the end of time. They believed that when somebody went dark, which is their term, that they became a zombie and had to be killed because basically the person was possessed by demons and all this weird stuff. And so it's been ongoing for several days.
Literally? I mean, did they actually kill people, or is this like slain in the spirit? Oh,
no, killed people. In fact, Lorie Valo, one of the main perpetrators, both of her children ended up dead.
Oh, wow.
Buried on her and her ex-husband. And there were attempts, and the ex and the wife of the man she's currently married to also ended up dead under mysterious circumstances. It's a lot. So basically these crimes run from Arizona to Idaho. Now, she has been charged finally, both of them have, with the murder of her children in Idaho, and her current husband has been charged not only with the murder of her children, but also the murder of his former wife in Idaho. But his trial has been set. It was set for November, but it's not going to take place until 2022 now. But because Idaho does not have a not guilty by virtue of insanity plea, she cannot stand trial because she's failed several psychological exams. She's not fit for trial. So she's just in limbo where his trial is going to commence. However, the murder of her ex-husband took place in Arizona, and they're investigating that. Now, Arizona does have a not guilty by virtue of insanity. So I guess what I'm asking is, even though these charges are pending over here in Idaho, can Arizona go ahead and charge her and force her to trial in Arizona for that murder? Because I know double jeopardy is a thing.
Okay, first of all, you've got two different concepts going here.
Right.
One is fitness to stand trial,
right,
and the other is not guilty by reason of insanity.
Right.
If a person is not guilty by reason of insanity, or even if that is their claim, they might still be fit to stand trial, because the standard for each of those is quite different, and the result of each is quite different. So but if she truly is unfit to stand trial, it doesn't matter where she
Okay.
goes. You know, whether
Okay.
whether they have a not guilty by reason of insanity or not is going to make any difference, because if she is not the standard for incapable of standing trial is not being able to understand the charges against you and not being able to participate in your own defense. And if she can't even understand what she's being charged with, then they can't try her anywhere.
Okay. I know that myself and my subscribers are going to go, she's very well capable of what she knows what she's done. She's just has a good act. But I was hopeful that maybe, even though Idaho can't get her, that maybe Arizona would. But I suppose it would just
It's
be
possible they could. It's also a standard that can change at any moment, because a person can be incapable of participating in their own defense, you know, for whatever reason. You know, the person might be in a coma, and as soon as they wake up, now you can try them. And, you know, in her case, if a psychiatrist has found that she's incapable of standing trial, she can be rehabilitated. You just send her to a mental hospital and rehabilitate her to the point where she can now participate in her own trial.
interesting. Well, hopefully she'll get her day in court. That's all we want, is her to get her day in court.
The other thing, though, is she's probably locked up in a facility for the criminally insane.
Mhm.
And if she is deemed unable to stand trial, she's likely to be there for the rest of her life until she ever gets to the point where she can stand trial. She's going to be held there for the rest of her life.
Yep.
So essentially, she's already in trial for life. I'm
Oh,
sorry, she's
in
already
prison for life.
incarcerated for life. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one reason why it's being played up so much is that Idaho has already said they would pursue the death penalty.
Mm.
They're pursuing it in the case of her husband, just because of the aggressiveness and the awfulness around the crimes. They are pursuing the death penalty in his case. So I suspect they would be doing the same for her. So it's probably, would probably save her life if she continues to be insane.
I personally am opposed to the death penalty.
I don't want to debate anybody about it. I'm in favor of it in certain circumstances. I don't like taking a life, but I do believe there are some crimes so vicious that perhaps, and that there are some people that are not capable of being rehabilitated, that I think it's warranted. And it's a very, very small percentage that I think fit into that. But these particular criminals, just because I've been into this case for years now and know the details in and out, I think they fit into that percentage, in my opinion.
Okay.
Very small percentage.
Well, my reasoning has little or nothing to do with the criminal themselves, but for me, it's a procedural issue. And I see the system as being too prejudiced and too inconsistent to be able to really have the ability to handle a death penalty. I think there's too many people that we have wrongfully put to death.
I see that. I see that. And I know that somehow politics always makes its way into my conversations, but I'm a libertarian. I am very much, I'm conservative on physical issues, but very, very leftist on most social issues. So I think you and I probably see right eye to eye on most things on that side. I'm also against government interference in our daily lives, everything from medical to, and I do know that the system, I have law enforcement in my family, so I'm very, very pro police, and pro legal system, but I know that there's a lot of reforms that need to happen. I think getting rid of qualified immunity would be a good start, but that's a whole other show. It might make officers think twice before they act erratically. And then there's some other things that can definitely do. I think our prison system needs to be reformed.
No question.
I think private prisons need to go. And I think we need to look more into rehabilitation rather than just punishment. In 99.9% of the cases.
We're the only country that that punishes our criminals for life.
Yeah.
Once they get out of prison, in a lot of states, you can't ever get your voting rights back. You have to declare on employment applications that you have a felony conviction. Yeah, that kind of information isn't even available in most countries.
I agree, and I find it horrendous that the country that I still think is the greatest country in the world is on the same list with North Korea, in how that they and I think Qatar and some other countries that we would consider very backwards when it comes to human rights, on the same list as those countries when it comes to how we treat prisoners, and I'm ashamed of that fact. I really am. So a whole lot of reform needs to happen there. I do wish that the term defund the police I do wish another term had been used, because I think it gives a false connotation. Reform the police. I would stand by reform the police, not defund. I don't want to send a social worker into a violent encounter. I think maybe a social worker and a police officer might be a good thing, but I think that was the wrong terminology there. I really do.
I agree with you 100% there.
Yep.
I do think that our police are being asked to do so many things that just are not police work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes governments could help. I mean, I understand what drives a lot of crimes, and that's poverty. I get that. But I also think what they're doing in some cities, like decriminalizing crime, shoplifting under like $1,000, I think that's going a bit too far.
Yeah,
because
I
it's
would agree with you
encouraging
there.
more
I hadn't
crime.
heard of that.
San Francisco has decriminalized, San Francisco and LA have both decriminalized shoplifting under $1,000. Look up the what do you call it? Flash robs that have been happening in San Francisco. Just these gangs of hooded figures running into these high-end department stores and just stealing, and then running out. And then a lot of chain stores are closing up and moving out of higher crime neighborhoods because of that. And it's creating, in my opinion, more food deserts, more pharmacy deserts for these lower income. It's making things worse, in my opinion. Take it what you will, but I think that's contributing to it. I really do. And I know we need bail reform, absolutely. But I also think that, somebody being able to assault you and beat you and then get out the next day on $1,000, or try to run you down with their car and get out the next day on $1,000, which is what happened with the parade guy. I think he should have still been sitting in jail, and that would never have happened.
Yeah, I think we are way too soft on vehicular crimes. It's almost legal to kill people as long as you do it with a car.
Yeah. People kill. I mean, if you take away guns, they're going to kill using a car. They're going to kill using a knife. It's, killing is killing. I don't care how you do it, and we can't be soft on that. If you try to run somebody down with your car, you shouldn't be able to pay $1,000 and be out on the street the next day. That's just my opinion. I think the bail should fit the crime in a lot of ways. And I do know that there's other ways that we can reform and make that better. I know there's a lot of nuances in there, but that's just a flying above it helicopter kind of take that I have.
I would disagree with you there, but that's okay. That's neither here nor there.
Exactly. Well, all right. Well, tell me about your journey from belief to non-belief. I didn't realize that you'd only been a couple of years. I thought you had been a atheist for at least 10 or 15 years. Because I'm a fan of your channel.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it's kind of funny, because if you watch some of my early videos, I'll tell you that I'll mention that it happened very quickly. But since I've talked to other people and had more conversations, and this is, one of those memory things, it's kind of started clicking with me, a lot of things that have happened in the past that were precursors, things that caused the beginnings of the fracture. And really the beginnings of the fracturing of my faith started probably when my second child was in high school. Because I sent all of my kids to Christian schools. And my second daughter had a graduating class of 50. And in that graduating class of 50, 3 girls got pregnant. Now, one of them discovered that she was pregnant during the summer between her sophomore and her junior year. So she just simply withdrew from school. And the school had a policy that if you get pregnant, you are expelled. And so the other 2 girls got expelled. And then they went to the public school. And that really gave me a moment to think that why is it that the public school can forgive these girls, but the Christian school cannot?
Yeah.
If our, if what we are supposed to do is forgive people and forgive them 70 times, 7 times, why is it that we cannot forgive? So that was the first crack in my faith. There were other cracks that came as a result of political issues. I became more and more progressive. I started as a conservative, and I slowly became more and more progressive. And as I did, I kind of distanced myself a little bit from some of my other Christian friends, but not that much. I still believed in the same faith that they did, the same God that they did. I just didn't always agree with them on political issues. But that, was another, minor crack. The first major crack came when I started reflecting on the life of the Apostle Paul. Now, one thing you have to realize is I was Calvinist. And as a Calvinist, we look at that Jesus died only for the elect, and he did not die for those who are not elect. And the Calvinist position takes that position because if Jesus died for everyone, then Jesus' death wasn't effective. It only saved some people, and it was a complete failure as to those who are never saved.
Like the tulip doctrine, the tulip doctrine, yeah.
Right. And the other attraction of the Calvinist doctrine is that God is completely sovereign over everything. And if man chooses whether or not he is saved, then God is not sovereign over heaven. Man decides who goes to heaven and who doesn't.
Were you did you go to an actual Calvinist church, or was it more like you were Presbyterian?
Well, it was a congregational church, but they were very open about the fact that they adhered to Calvinist theology.
Okay.
And so when actually at that point, I was actually going to a Presbyterian church at that point. I've moved a lot. And
I did too.
To a lot of different churches.
I did too.
So when I started in the Calvinist church, I was at a congregational church, but at the point where I got to this point, I was actually attending a Presbyterian church for a while, and then a Baptist church that had Calvinist leanings. The Baptist church that I went to in this time frame was more of a 4-point Calvinist church. They really didn't hold completely to the limited atonement idea, but they pretty much did to the other 4 points of Calvinism. But one of the things that I started reflecting on is, if God can appear to the Apostle Paul and call him to come and serve, obviously God wanted Paul to serve him.
Yep.
What does that say about people who are not believers? It says God doesn't want them. And if they are not saved, not because they chose to reject God, but because God chose not to call them, what does that say about God? And that's where the major break in my faith came. And that's where I moved away from Calvinism. And I kind of came up with my own theology at that point, which was kind of a universalism. And what I concluded was that the Calvinist theology was right as to people living on earth. But as soon as you die, you would go to God, and God would say, here, this is who I am. This is what I have to offer you. Would you like to have this? And that you would be given this opportunity after death once you had a chance to see and know and make an informed decision. And that's the other thing I argue with theists, I should say not theists, but Christians about all the time, is how can anyone make a choice for God as an informed choice if God's not going to reveal himself? You know?
Exactly. I never understood the whole Calvinist thing, because the only thing about Calvinist doctrine, I'm not sure if it's strict Calvinist, that I really appreciated was the whole, like, if you're elected and you're saved, you go to paradise or you go to heaven, you're saved. If you're not, you just cease to exist. Now, some Calvinist churches did not preach like eternal punishment,
Right.
infinite punishment for finite crimes. It was just total annihilation. I
Mhm.
thought that was a lot more merciful.
Mhm.
So I appreciated that, but I never understood the whole, okay, I'm going to pray to God. I'm going to, I'm going to hope that he chooses me in the end. I'm going to live my whole life devoted to him in the hopes that he will choose me in the end. I never got that,
Mhm. Mhm. Well, supposedly he's made the decision even before the creation of the world.
Right.
And that was the other thing is I for the first time, I looked at Calvinism from an unbeliever's perspective, and that's something I had never done before, and I really don't think Calvinists do, because when you look at Calvinism from an unbeliever's perspective, God chooses a very small segment of the population to be his and to be saved, but he chooses damnation for the vast majority, and that just that I could no longer tolerate that as a faith.
I totally get it. And so you just came to,
So yeah, that's where I
you were a
moved to kind of
universalist.
a universe. But I didn't, I was in that for a very short time, so I didn't really explore much of what I believed at that point. So I really didn't have a well-defined faith at that point, because what happened next was the final straw, the straw that broke the camel's back. And this came from my son. My son said to me, "Mom, Noah's flood didn't happen." I said, "What do you mean Noah's flood didn't happen?" And he said, "The methane gas would have killed them all." And I've told my son this a couple of times, is, being the adult, and at the time my son was 17, he's 20 now. I said, "Okay," and nodded my head. And after he left the room, then I looked it up on the internet. And I found like 3 different websites all confirming that he was right. And not only did I find out that he was right, well, after that, that's what got me. He said, "Mom, watch this." And he showed me a video of the ARC protest from, it was probably about 2018,
Yeah,
somewhere
the
around
Ark
there.
Encounter, the Ark Encounter
The Ark
exhibit,
Encounter, right.
yeah.
And when I saw that banner that said Genocide and Incest Park, that made me so angry. And then Aaron Ra was talking, and I was listening to Aaron Ra, and Aaron Ra was the straw that broke the camel's back and finally ended my faith forever. Because what he said was, we know from history that Noah's Ark never happened. And as soon as he said that, I realized not only did I know that he was right, but I have always known that. Because having studied Egyptian history, Chinese history, there was never a period when all the humans were just wiped off the face of the earth, and then about 100 years later they came back. And it has just never occurred to me
Noah's
that
Ark
human history doesn't match up with Bible history.
Noah's Ark is one of, like, I think 4 or 5 flood myths that came out of that same Mesopotamian era, and it's not even the oldest. It's like a ripoff of a ripoff of a ripoff.
And I didn't know any of that until afterwards. So that was the moment when I went full on atheist, because everything in my faith was based on the Bible. And once I realized that the Bible contained error, it was no longer the word of God. And once it was no longer the word of God, I had no basis for believing in God. And that's when I, for the first time, started reflecting on all of these answers to prayer that I've experienced, and all the times that I felt that God was speaking to me. And when I started looking at all of those experiences from a skeptic's perspective, there was never a time when God spoke to me that it couldn't have been my own thoughts. There was never a time when God answered prayer in a way that couldn't have happened if there was no God.
Yep. Absolutely. My journey started like I was raised Pentecostal and then Southern Baptist. And then I'm not sure if that was like I went more progressive. I'm not sure which way I went there. But that, and then in college, I mean, I was dealing with my sexuality. I was dealing with just very apparent sexism in that, I wanted to be a pastor, and I was told I couldn't be a pastor just because I didn't have a penis. And so okay, so that started to crack, and I saw I was a geek, and I was very much into Norse, Roman, and Greek mythology. And the more I got into that, the more I realized the stories in the Bible were very much just myths, and then man's way of explaining his world. And then I became a Episcopalian, and then I was just a theist for a little while, and then I admitted, okay, I don't believe in anything, and so I've been an atheist ever since. So it sounds like you and I both kind of went from more conservative to more liberal denominations, and then just cut it off.
I don't know that I really moved to more liberal denominations, because when I changed the theology, I was still attending a Presbyterian church. But I was starting to question, do I really believe any of this? And I did ask the pastor some leading questions that I thought would cause her to discuss some of the doubts that I was having, but she just kind of glossed over them and thought, okay, I guess that's that.
Well, they're not really trained to answer those questions. It's, accepted on faith, but there's so much other stuff in life that you wouldn't just accept on faith. You know, if faith were the only important thing, then why do we have so many anti-vaxxers? And I'm not talking about just COVID. I'm talking about in general. Okay, well, you don't need to see the evidence, just accept it on faith that it's going to work. It's kind of
yeah, but you could take that from the other perspective too and say, well, I'm just going to take it on faith that God's going to protect me. I don't need a vaccine.
True. See, that's a true skeptic, y'all. She fought skepticism with skepticism. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a blast. I hope I didn't bore you with.
Oh, not at all. I think it's been a lot of fun, and thank you for having me.
Everyone, I'm going to link the Godless Granny YouTube channel up above. Please check her out. Go over and subscribe to her. Let her know that 𝐲𝐞𝐿 sent you. And we'll be back real soon with another true crime story. Until next time, 𝐲𝐞𝐿.
Live your life.
Out.